My name is Amelia Moore. I'm 21, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the family's invisible bank, the quiet fixer, the one everyone leans on but rarely notices. Growing up, I learned early that being reliable came with a price. My own life quietly placed on hold while the world orbited around my brother Mason and my younger sister Ivy. Mason had the kind of charm that made teachers smile and neighbors fuss over him. Always the star, always first in line for every reward. Ivy, on the other hand, required careful handling. Sensitive, dramatic, the one whose tears were meticulously managed. And then there was me. Background. Unremarkable, predictable, useful. Our parents were experts in subtle control. Dad ran his small car lot like a chessboard, always moving pieces without revealing his strategy. Mom kept careful tabs on everything. Which neighbor brought what to the church potluck, which kid needed more attention, which opportunity could be leveraged. In that household, nothing was just family. Everything was a transaction. I worked nights at a diner just off the highway, a small place with laminated menus, the kind where waiters memorize orders and smile through abuse. People thought I was cheerful, and mostly I was. You had to be when juggling 5 plates and memorizing which booth brought their own ranch. But the facade didn't mask the exhaustion that came from always giving, always stepping aside, always making others comfortable. Then came my 21st birthday. I'd finished a double shift, hands sticky from syrup and coffee, when I walked into the kitchen to see a small sheet cake, a mug filled with plastic forks, and a forced chorus of "Surprise!" Mom was beaming like she'd orchestrated a Broadway finale. Dad clapped me on the shoulder. Mason took a selfie with the cake, captioning it "Family Time," and Ivy tried to sing off-key, just to be cute. The moment of truth came when Dad reached into his pocket and slid a folded bill across the table. "Your grandma sent this for you," he said. I unfolded it. $50. "50?" I asked before I could stop myself. Mom's smile tightened. "Don't be ungrateful, Amelia." I folded the bill into my wallet and nodded, tasting something bitter at the back of my throat. I told myself not to think about it too much. Maybe Grandma had held the rest back. Maybe there'd been a mix-up. Maybe the $50 was all I was meant to get. A month later, Grandma came to visit. She leaned on her cane and looked me in the eye. "Did you get the 10,000 I sent for your birthday?" I blinked. I only got 50. Her face changed in a heartbeat. She slammed her hand on the table so hard that the forks rattled. "What? They gave you what?" Mom froze, her smile cracking. Dad looked at the ceiling. Mason muttered, "Whoa," like this was some kind of prank. But the joke wasn't funny, and it never would be. Being the background child means you learn to accept scraps and call them enough. When Mason needed braces, he got them plus a weekend trip to the beach. When I chipped a tooth playing basketball, Mom said, "We'll smooth it out when we can." I got a job bussing tables, and suddenly my tips became currency. Every dollar I earned was quietly siphoned away. Gas for Dad's car, therapy copays for Ivy, startup cash for Mason. I kept a running tally on my phone until the numbers made me feel stupid. I stopped at $2,380. Grandma had tried to keep things fair. She gave each grandkid an allocation: school, first car, birthday. Structured, controlled. But my parents treated the trust like a faucet, dipping in whenever they pleased. They filed forms, handled withdrawals, all while pretending to act in my best interest. When I asked questions, Dad's sigh was heavy with condescension, Mom's answer cloaked in patronizing concern. I relaxed because in my family, survival meant going limp. Back at the diner, I learned the rhythm of service and silence, the sound of orders being called, the scrape of chairs, the hum of the mixer, all became the backdrop to my quiet life. At home, small humiliations piled up. Mom texting me to pick up Ivy, Dad borrowing my car with an empty tank, Mason using my laptop for a week without a word. Always the chorus, always the reminder. We're family, we share. Grandma was a different story. She never treated me like a shadow. Sharp-eyed and unafraid, she often told me, "I hate feeling like a checkbook with shoes." She reminded me there was a world beyond what my parents allowed, a world where my work and worth could be recognized without strings attached. And then there were the hints of betrayal, subtle but unavoidable. Dad's casual suggestion that I co-sign loans for Mason. Mom's insistence that my tips and earnings were family contributions. Even Ivy's innocent requests often came with a silent expectation. I would sacrifice, quietly and endlessly. By the time I turned 21, the $50 incident felt less like a birthday disappointment and more like the latest chapter in a pattern that had defined my life. Mason's business dreams, Ivy's trip abroad, Dad's expansion plans, Mom's kitchen renovation, all with my name silently attached as guarantor, chauffeur, and financial backstop. That night, after Grandma's revelation, I went to bed with a strange mixture of anger, shame, and clarity. Something inside me had shifted. The background role I'd been trained to inhabit suddenly felt like a chain, and for the first time I thought about what it would be like to step out from behind it. I didn't know yet how, but the moment had come. The next afternoon, Grandma invited me to her kitchen. No parents, no Mason, just me and her, and for the first time in years, a sense of privacy that didn't feel like a trap. She gestured for me to sit and opened her worn leather folder, the smell of aged paper mingling with the faint scent of lemon soap she always wore. "Bring everything you've been asked to sign this year," she said, voice calm but firm. "Bank statements, receipts, forms, everything." I obeyed, carrying a thick stack of papers that somehow represented every unfairness I'd endured. Grandma flipped through them with precision, tapping her finger against specific entries, making little sounds in her throat that meant she was cataloging wrongs. Withdrawals labeled household reimbursement, transfers for Mason's business, advances for Ivy's therapy, and then my birthday money. 2 weeks before my 21st, $10,000 had been transferred from the trust into a joint account with my name and my parents'. I froze. That's my signature?" I asked, barely able to speak. Grandma looked up. "It isn't yours. They forged it." She snapped a photo of the document with her phone and sent it to someone named Samuel. Then she picked up the landline. "Come over," she said into the receiver. She hung up before the person could respond. An hour later, my parents burst in without knocking. Mason followed, hoodie up, hands shoved deep into pockets. Mom wore her practiced nurse smile. "What is this?" Mom asked, sweet and sharp all at once. "Where is Amelia's 10,000? Grandma demanded, eyes cold and unwavering. Dad laughed nervously. "It went to expenses," he said. "Whose expenses?" Grandma's voice cut like glass. "Family," Dad replied, too quickly. Mom turned to me. "Amelia, don't make a scene." But the scene had already begun. I felt a calm rise in me, a strange detachment from fear or guilt. I had seen the patterns for years, and now the truth was undeniable. "You forged my signature," I said quietly, my voice steady. Mom flinched. "We handle paperwork because you're young. We just want to protect you." "I'm 21, I said, the words like stepping stones to a new self. "You're being ungrateful," Dad said, his tone that old weapon of manipulation. Grandma cut him off. "You are not going to itemize parenting to the child you stole from." "Stole?" The word hung in the air like a dropped plate. "It's money, okay? It's not like we burned it in a barrel," Mason muttered. "I'm the family," I said, surprising even myself. "And I'm what?" Grandma leaned back, jaw set like granite. "Here's what is going to happen. You will transfer the full 10,000 to Amelia today. You will remove your names from any accounts with hers. You will return the trustees' calls. You will stop using her as cosigner, chauffeur, or piggy bank." Mom's voice turned sugary, thin. "You're confused." "No, I'm not," Grandma said. "I may forget where I left my reading glasses, but I do not forget theft." Dad's face hardened, his attempt at control slipping like sand through fingers. "We are not doing this in front of the kids." "We already are," I said. My voice had a calm I didn't recognize, but it carried. The shift inside me felt like a door finally swinging open. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't pleading. I was done. No more carrying silence. No more covering debts I didn't owe. No more letting them manipulate my name or my money. I packed my folder, kissed Grandma's cheek, and whispered, "Thank you. I love you." She squeezed my hand. "I love you too, Amelia." Walking past my parents that day, I felt the invisible hooks they had used my entire life scrape uselessly against me. They didn't work anymore. That night, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree with messages. Guilt texts, angry texts, frantic calls. I muted them. I went to work, served iced tea, and smiled at tourists while the world outside tried to pull me back into old roles. But I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, freedom wasn't abstract, it was tangible. Grandma called the trustee that evening. Within hours, parental access was frozen. An independent sub-account was created in my name alone. The audit was set in motion. For the first time, my finances, my efforts, and my life were mine, not a tool for someone else's gain. I stayed late at the diner that night, listening to the mixer hum and the plates clatter, but it didn't feel like background noise anymore. It felt like the soundtrack to a life I could finally call my own. By the next morning, the apartment above the nail salon had become my new sanctuary, small, clean, and completely mine. The landlord didn't care about my odd hours or the quiet piles of boxes I dragged up. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was borrowing space in someone else's life. I unpacked slowly, aware of the weight I was shedding with each item. My phone was silent, a rarity I almost forgot existed. There were no demands, no guilt-laden messages, just quiet and the strange thrill of autonomy. The calls from my parents continued, but I let them ring. Every message felt like a whisper from a life I was leaving behind. Mom's texts were predictable. "We forgive you." "Return the car keys." "You broke your father's heart." Mason sent the occasional, "Bro, you made it weird," which earned an automatic no from me before I turned the phone off. That first week, I learned how different life could feel when I answered only to myself. I walked to the diner before sunrise, inhaling the crisp morning air. I kept a small calendar, writing shifts in neat ink, leaving intentional blanks for rest. At home, I ironed my work shirts instead of yanking them from the chair, cooked meals I wanted to eat, and bought a cheap planner for bills and small routines. Grandma visited that Tuesday, and we sat across from each other at her kitchen table. "Your grandfather used to say, 'Closure is the expensive word for boundaries,'" she said, sipping tea. "You found both." "I wish I'd found them earlier," I admitted, a quiet honesty in my voice. "You found them when you were ready," she said. "Most people never do." Her presence reminded me that life didn't have to be a constant ledger of who owed what to whom. That day, she handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter from the trust in plain English. The $10,000 had been reinstated. The unauthorized transfers reversed. A notary would remove my parents' names from all accounts. "Thank you," I said, overwhelmed. "You told the truth out loud," Grandma said. Her eyes were fierce and kind all at once. For the first time, honesty didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like breathing. The weeks that followed were quiet, but each day brought a small revolution. I declined requests to co-sign loans for Mason. I refused to drive Ivy to last-minute errands. I said no, without guilt. I even refused to fund the startup whims of my parents' plans. Instead, I filled the spaces with things that felt mine. Tuesday lunches with Grandma, quiet mornings reading books at the diner, and small purchases that reminded me that I could keep what I earned. A secondhand laptop, non-slip shoes for long shifts, a community college class in bookkeeping, skills for me, not a gift to someone else. The guilt texts slowed. They lost weight with every ignored message. Mom called once from a new number, accusing Grandma of turning me against her. I answered calmly, no. She reminded me I have a right to myself. It was strange, that first wave of calm. The background child was gone. In her place stood someone who had seen clearly and refused to be dragged back into old patterns. When I did see Mason or Ivy by chance, in the grocery store or at the gas station, we said hi. No negotiations, no explanations. Dad attempted jokes that fell flat. Mom reached for my arm, then stopped mid-motion. The old scripts had no hold on me anymore. The first major victory was subtle. When Mason asked for a last-minute loan for his detailing supplies, I typed, deleted, and retyped my answer 5 times. Finally, I sent a simple no. Silence. No arguments. No guilt. The world didn't end. It was the first real proof that boundaries could exist, that refusing someone's demands didn't make you cruel. It made you human. Grandma visited again the following Tuesday. We shared the same soup as always. "He would have liked you speaking up," she said, a soft pride in her voice. I smiled. "I wish he'd been here to see it." "You two would have collided," she said. "That's how steel is made." And in that moment, I realized that all the tiny humiliations, the stolen tips, the forged signatures, the late-night errands, they'd forged something too, a resilience I never expected to have. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was living. By the end of the month, my small apartment had transformed into a sanctuary. Boxes unpacked, walls decorated with photos and notes that reminded me who I was, not who my family wanted me to be. Each item had its place. Each routine was mine. The bed was made before I left for work. The calendar held both obligations and empty spaces intentionally left for rest. For the first time, my life felt like it belonged to me. I kept my phone on Do Not Disturb for everyone except Grandma. Messages from my parents still arrived, but I no longer felt compelled to answer. Mason's occasional pleas for money were met with polite but firm refusals. Ivy asked for rides. I gave her Uber fare instead. It was the first adult trade I'd ever made, boundaries that didn't require guilt or justification. The diner became more than just a job. It was a quiet rhythm I could rely on. I learned to move efficiently, to carry multiple plates without thinking, to anticipate customers' needs. But more importantly, the work stayed at work. When I left, it didn't cling to me like it had at home, where every shift had been filtered through family expectations and silent demands. Grandma was my anchor. Every Tuesday, we shared soup, and every visit came with lessons disguised as stories. "Your grandfather believed in rules and fairness," she said one afternoon, stirring her tea. "Not everyone follows them. That's why you must." I nodded, absorbing it not as instruction, but as guidance. She had fought for me, and now it was my turn to fight for myself in small ways every day. The trust corrections were finalized. My parents' names were removed from my accounts, and I received my own debit card. I didn't rush to spend it frivolously. Instead, I bought practical things: good shoes for the long shifts, a secondhand laptop, a few textbooks for my bookkeeping class. Tools for living, not indulgence. For the first time, money felt like mine, not a pawn in someone else's game. Life at home began to shift too, not because my parents changed, but because I had changed. When I ran into them in town, there was a polite distance. I answered when addressed, but only with what was necessary. Mom reached for my arm once, paused, and then let it fall. Dad's jokes fell flat. Mason tried to tease, but I didn't engage. The old scripts, the manipulation, the guilt, the invisible chains, they no longer worked. And in this quiet, I found small joys. Morning walks before the heat set in. Coffee at the corner cafe, sipping slowly, savoring the space that was mine. Reading books without interruption. Watching the sunrise from my little balcony. These simple acts felt radical after a lifetime of running errands, answering to others, and carrying unearned responsibility. Even my romantic life began to grow in clarity. I spent evenings with my boyfriend Kevin, talking openly and laughing freely. He had known some of my family struggles but had never lived them, and his support was steady, quiet, and grounding. Unlike my family, he never demanded repayment for affection or effort. Love, I realized, could be mutual, respectful, free from ledger sheets and obligation. Grandma watched this transformation quietly, smiling from her kitchen corner. "Closure," she said once, handing me a sandwich, "isn't just about stopping them. It's about starting for yourself." I chewed, nodding. She was right. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped in a story written by others. I was authoring my own life, chapter by chapter, small choices building into something real. At work, at home, and in my new routines, I learned to say no without guilt. I learned to accept that boundaries might upset others, but that didn't make me wrong. Each no was a brick in the foundation of a life built for me, not borrowed from my parents' expectations. Even the little rituals became meaningful. I kept the $50 from my 21st birthday folded carefully in my wallet, not as a wound, but as a reminder of what I had once accepted and what I refused to accept anymore. The $10,000 from the trust had already been invested in tools, tuition, and a modest emergency cushion. But the real gift wasn't the money. It was the moment someone with power and conviction stood with me and refused to let me be stolen from. I built a small life that fit me. Tuesdays with Grandma, clean shoes, notebooks with numbers that added up, and a phone mostly quiet except for her calls and a select few work messages. I wasn't a ledger, a chauffeur, or a silent partner in someone else's ambitions. I was Amelia Moore, and I was present in my own story. And for the first time, that felt like freedom. Months passed, and the rhythm of my life settled into something I could finally call mine. The apartment, small but orderly, became a haven. The routines I once thought trivial, making the bed, planning meals, writing shifts in my calendar, felt like acts of liberation. Every choice was intentional. Every day was mine to shape. I still worked at the diner, but it no longer felt like survival. I moved with purpose, served with efficiency, smiled without pretense. My coworkers noticed the change, though none could put their finger on it. There was a quiet confidence about me now, the kind that isn't loud but impossible to ignore. Grandma remained my compass. Tuesdays with her became sacred. We'd share soup, talk quietly about books, work, and life. She never overstepped. She never tried to fix what wasn't broken. Instead, she offered support and guidance that let me grow without guilt. "You've learned what most people never do," she said one afternoon, "to stand for yourself and to start your life without fear of family chains." Kevin and I found our own rhythm too. Our evenings together were warm and light, filled with laughter and honest conversation. He asked questions, listened, and never judged my past. He became a partner in life, not a co-signer for my emotions or my labor. Love, I realized, wasn't meant to be transactional. At home, the distance with my family solidified. Mom still sent occasional texts, pleas, guilt-laden apologies, demands thinly veiled as concern. I ignored most, responding only when necessary and always on my terms. Dad and Mason tried their usual tactics, jokes, requests, half-hearted explanations, but they met calm refusal. Each no reinforced my autonomy. Each boundary carved out a little more space that was unmistakably mine. Ivy reached out sometimes, asking small favors or seeking advice. I gave where I could, but always clearly, always with limits. For the first time, family interactions were not draining. They were manageable. I could care without being consumed. The most meaningful changes were subtle. I cooked for myself without guilt, bought groceries that weren't family contributions, and planned weekends that weren't dictated by my parents' whims. I invested in my education and skills. I signed up for more bookkeeping classes, building a foundation for financial independence. Each step was deliberate, each purchase a statement. This is mine. Even the $50 from my 21st birthday remained in my wallet, carefully folded. It was no longer a reminder of what I lacked, but a symbol of what I reclaimed: my dignity, my voice, my choices. The $10,000 from the trust was allocated wisely: tuition, tools, and a modest emergency cushion. But the true inheritance was something intangible: the ability to refuse exploitation, to say no, and to keep my life intact. Occasionally, I reflected on the old patterns, the stolen tips, the forged signatures, the endless errands. But those reflections were quiet and unemotional. They were history, not present. I had stepped out of the shadow of others' manipulation and into the light of my own agency. The freedom wasn't loud. It was a series of small victories, stitched together by intention, honesty, and respect for myself. I could breathe, laugh, love, work, and rest without being tethered to the expectations, guilt, and financial demands of my parents. One evening, as I closed my notebook after budgeting for the month, I felt a deep sense of calm. I wasn't rebuilding a life from scratch. I was finally living the one that had always belonged to me. The past, with its betrayals and manipulations, no longer held power. I had reclaimed it, not through confrontation or revenge, but by defining my boundaries and insisting on being respected. I smiled at the reflection in my window. Amelia Moore, 33, independent, grounded, free. The story wasn't about breaking ties with my family. It was about breaking the chains that had defined me for too long. And in that quiet, solid moment, I realized freedom doesn't come from distance alone. It comes from clarity, choice, and the courage to stand for yourself unapologetically. This wasn't revenge. It was closure. This was life, fully mine.